Chapter 26, Digestive System, Part 2, Screencast 3. This is the final screencast for Chapter 26, and it will be focusing on the large intestine. The large intestine, also called the large bowel. Now, this has a much wider tube and is significantly shorter than the small intestine. It is located in the abdominal and pelvic cavity and runs from the ileocecal junction to termination at the anus. The functions are to absorb water and electrolytes from remaining digested material. Watery chyme will be compacted into feces, and feces will be stored until eliminated through defecation. Now, if we look at the general structure of the large intestine, we can actually see ascending colon, transverse colon, descending colon, sigmoid colon, rectum, and then the last portion will be the anal canal. What we'll be addressing a little bit later is the smooth muscle known as the tanicola, and also the actual individual bumps that we see known as haustra. Now, the specialized structures of the large intestine include the tanicola. It is a thin longitudinal bundle of smooth muscle, and it acts like an elastic waistband, and that is what's giving the large intestine its very characteristic bumpy appearance. And once again, this tanicola, the contraction basically bunches up the large intestine into many sacs known as haustra. The anal canal, this is the last few centimeters of the large intestine. It is lined by stratified squamous epithelial tissue, and that makes sense due to the mechanical stress associated with defecation. There are longitudinal ridges, which are known as anal columns. There is the internal anal sphincter. This is involuntary smooth muscle at the base of the anal canal. And then there is an external anal sphincter, and this is actually voluntary skeletal muscle. Sphincters are normally closed off, but they will be relaxing during defecation. Here we can see the tunics of the large intestine, and for the most part, they're not dramatic. There's not a lot going on. We're not going to see significant secretions. We're not going to see a lot of absorption of nutrients taking place. So really not a lot going on here. So not really a remarkable image with respect to the tunics of the large intestine. Now, what is very characteristic of the large intestine is our indigenous microbiota. So this quite often is referred to as the microbiome, and we have a very significant bacterial colony living in the large intestine. So once again, it is normal. This is typically E. coli. If we look at the role of this bacteria, it is about breaking down carbohydrates, proteins, and lipids in chyme, but this is going to be accomplished through fermentation and not due to enzymatic activity. The product of this fermentation process is the production of carbon dioxide, hydrogen ion, and some other substances. The indigenous microbiota are also responsible for the production of B vitamins and vitamin K. These will be absorbed from the large intestine and into the blood. The final product is going to be feces, and feces is composed of water, salt, epithelial cells, bacteria, and any material that has not been digested to this point. Now, motility and regulation of motility in the large intestine is very different than what is found in other regions of the GI tract. In the large intestine, peristalsis is weak and sluggish. In its place will be haustral churning. The relaxed haustrum will fill with material, and the distension will actually stimulate reflex contractions within the muscularis. This increased churning will move material to more distal haustra. Now, mass movements, those are due to the powerful contractions of the tanicola. What these contractions will do is propel fecal matter towards the rectum. This generally will occur 2 to 3 times per day, usually after a meal. Now, there is the gastrocolic reflex. This is initiated by stomach distension. Remember, we tend to see mass movements after a meal, and this is what's initiating the mass movement. There is a defecation reflex. The filling of the rectum initiates the urge to defecate. There are signals sent to the spinal cord. There will be an increased parasympathetic output to the sigmoid colon and the rectum. decreases output to the internal involuntary anal sphincter. Voluntary defecation is generally learned about the age of 3. This will involve a Valsalva maneuver, and what happens during potty training is learning how to relax the external anal sphincter, which is actually skeletal muscle. Here we basically look at the defecation reflex, and we see the content stimulating the baroreceptors in the rectal wall. We have sensory input that's initiated by the baroreceptors within the rectum, and this is going to be relayed to the spinal cord. Now, we have to look at 2 different pathways. We have nerve signals from the cerebral cortex, and those are going to the external anal sphincter, and there will be learned movement or relaxation of that. Then we look at the parasympathetic activity, and note this is a spinal reflex, and we're actually going to see nerve signals that are relayed along parasympathetic axons. Increased nerve signals to smooth muscle of the sigmoid colon and rectum contract, squeezing the contents. Nerve signals to the internal anal sphincter cause this sphincter to actually relax, and resulting in defecation. Now, there are a number of disorders that are associated with the large intestine, and probably one of the most predominant is going to be colorectal cancer. This is the second most type of cancer in the United States, and it originates from malignant growths that can occur anywhere along the large intestine or the rectum, and usually they are arising from what are referred to as polyps. And what polyps are these outgrowths from colon mucosa. Now, when we look at risk factors, we're going to be seeing a pretty significant trend that a low-fiber diet plays a major role in most of the clinical situations involving the large intestine. So, family history, age, history of ulcerative colitis. The symptoms tend to be rectal bleeding, abdominal pain, and weight loss. Generally, these malignancies must be removed surgically, and there is screening via sigmoidoscopy, colonoscopy, and also a fecal occult blood test. So all of those are screens for colorectal cancer. Generally, it has been recommended that people over the age of 50 have regular colonoscopies. But now, due to the rise in colorectal cancer in a younger population, these guidelines are actually being looked at, and we're starting to see colonoscopies being recommended for younger individuals. Fecal transplant. This is actually a low-cost, low-risk procedure to treat C. diff. And what happens in this procedure, there's fecal matter from a donor, which will be placed in the colon of a patient. This generally is done either through enema or colonoscopy. Now, fecal transplants may also help to treat Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, or irritable bowel syndrome. There also is diverticulosis, and these are small bulges in the intestinal lining known as diverticula. These are typically formed when the colon narrows in response, once again, to low fiber. Diverticulitis is actually inflammation of diverticula, and this actually can be a life-threatening situation if the diverticula rupture and leak intestinal contents into the abdominal cavity. Last but not least, we have 2 opposite conditions. We have constipation, and this is a temporary impaired ability to defecate. Generally what's happened, for some reason, feces are compacted, making it more difficult for an individual to eliminate. Now, once again, low fiber does play a role in this condition, as does dehydration, lack of exercise, poor bowel habits, or it has been associated as a side effect of anesthesia. Diarrhea, now we're looking at the opposite condition, is disruption in normal mechanisms to absorb intestinal water. Typically, this is due to a large amount of osmotically active solutes that move large volumes of water into the colon as opposed to out of the colon.